you, and who will talk to us about funerary literature from Dendra based on the slabs from the tomb of Babi in the Cairo Museum. Please.
So, thank you at first to Andrea and to the French Institute in Cairo for the organization of this meeting on the first intermediate period in a so particular period, and above for the invitation. Well, before starting the paper on the funerary collection from Dendera, I would like to give a short account on the personal approach to the document I'm going to talk about. I had the possibility to get a direct check on the original in Cairo Museum in 1993 and 1994. Later, I could have several talks on text with Joris Borghout in the Dutch Institute for the Near East. And Professor Borghout was so very interested on this original collection of funerary literature.
Emanuele, sorry, yeah. Could I interrupt you? Do you have a PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I have.
Could you share it with us?
Yeah, but it's not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not able to the condition, so please can you give me the authorization for it? I cannot.
È giusto un dubbio che abbiamo avuto che non si vedeva.
No.
Grazie.
No, però non sono abilitato.
You can now.
Yeah, now, okay.
Now you can.
Okay. So I hope you can see now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. After this first approach to the document, the research practically stopped. And when Andrea Pillon was so kind to invite me to this meeting, I newly opened the dossier on the text of Baby, hoping on a new start and a new approach to the topic. The limestone slabs from the tomb of Baby were discovered in 1898 by Flinders Petrie during his season work in the necropolis of Dendera, and their texts were published in a final report. The monumental tomb consisted in a superstructure almost completely destroyed, with a burial chamber discovered by the archaeologists filled of water and reused in the Roman period. The only survived equipment of the original burial was represented by those covered slabs of the chamber. Their inner face, inscribed with hundreds of text columns, were carefully copied by the same Petrie and his wife just after the preliminary restoration that preserved the slabs from the threat of humidity. After these actions, the survived set of slabs moved to the Cairo Museum, where they received the Catalogue General number 28117. The Petrie edition identified the lid of a burial chamber, two short sides and the back side. Only parts of the burial set are now exposed in the museum, as already confirmed by the photographic dossier kept in the Dutch Institute. Currently, the extra plates of the Petrie edition and the preliminary presentation of text given by Griffith still remain a fundamental support for the study of the inscriptions. After this pioneering work, the slabs were comprised in the catalogue by Pierre Lacaux, who added some more information concerning the text. A first concrete approach to the inscription, Atov Partial, is due to the Coffin Text project that comprised some text in the final edition of Corpus. Year by year, other publications paid attention to this collection, such as the work of Shafiq Alam on the cult of Hathor, or the study of Henry Fisher on the Dendera epigraphy, where the scholar proposed a date for the burial of Baby before the unification of Mentuhotep II. Since the moment of the discovery, the date of the group of tombs where the mastaba of Baby stood has been debated. The structure is surely later than the Old Kingdom, but it's difficult to be more precise. Epigraphical patterns from the head side of the burial chamber seem to support the date proposed by Fisher, beside the particular arrangement of the first symmetric line with the name of Baby in the middle, as you can see here. We note other specific forms of signs already stressed by the same Fisher, the writing of the funerary offering, the disposition of the group Gentig Sech Nature, the writing of Imihut without the city determinative, and the signs Wa and Hebech. All these epigraphic patterns might confirm a first intermediate period date of the monument. The same sequence of titles borne by Davy in the chronological sequence reconstructed by the documentation of Dendera seems to confirm the date, surely post Old Kingdom. The main topic in the study of the monument is its collection of funerary texts. They are arranged in the stone surface with a complex redactional system, where, at least on the lid, a first ink version is followed by a not so careful carving of signs. The bad quality of the work done by the carver was noted by the Saint Petri, who supposed the inscriptions to have been the result of two different craftsmen. The first wrote the text draft with black ink, with a good handwriting. No evidence of red ink has been found, thus this version was actually preparatory for the final redaction, carved by another worker whose skill seems to have been less careful. Often, the result of the final version is a raw redaction where there are no traces of cursive version, but in some separation lines marked by the arrow on the slide. You see here an horizontal line, and here at the corner, and somewhere other evidence of the first redaction. Nevertheless, we can still have somewhere remains of this first written version. Sections of it are preserved in the part of lid where inserts of flint in the limestone made the carving impossible. The copies of Petrie return the old situation of what has been found, but in the publication of the British archaeologist, we can read any difference between the written parts of the text and the final carved version. The collection of the copies with the original in the museum has confirmed the situation, where small groups of painted signs were carefully copied by Petrie without any indication about their formal redaction. In our perspective, a first step in the study of the monument has to clearly reconstruct the different redaction of the text. This has been the aim of a preliminary copy of the lid, in which the written signs are in red, you see here at left, and the carved ones in black. The Petrie copies seem to stress the difference of the two redactions by means of a different way of rendering written signs from engraved ones, but the collection did not find an actual correspondence between the two renderings in Petrie edition. The formal approach to the inscriptions is the first step in the research of the funerary text of Baby. Indeed, more striking is the study of this funerary literature written into the chamber, an impressive collection of spells that only partially belong to the wider tradition of the classical coffin text. In the frame of this typical Middle Kingdom tradition, the inscriptions of Baby represent one of the richest collections. Just shy of 900 columns and lines of text are displayed on the slabs. It means that the original extension of the text could have been one of the longest collections of the post-Old Kingdom funerary literature. Besides the interest for the content, I would like to stress another formal aspect of the redaction, that is the ductus and the organization of the inscriptions. The edition of the monument makes us recognize two different epigraphic models. The first is typical of the lid, you see here, right at the top, with small signs arranged in different ways, such as the list in the upper right corner of the site, you see here. This is the part with the list. The other is characterized by a wider arrangement of signs and columns and by a more regular organization of a layout with 2 rows of columns and few horizontal lines with titles and other meta-textual information. Another specificity of foot and back is the lack of remains of ink version of text. To sum up, the layout of the two sides of the chamber respects a different, more regular arrangement of text. An observation concerns the dimension of the text. The columns into the lid of the chamber uses two basic models. The first, the upper register, is about 12 centimeters high. I mean this part here, you see. The other three are about 24 centimeters high. The sides of the columns in the head and back sides are different. The upper register seems to be bigger, about 30 centimeters high. The size of the lower register is difficult to be established due to the loss of the base of the slabs corresponding to the side joined with the bottom of the chamber. These dimensions are coherent with the traditional size of the post-Old Kingdom cursive manuscripts, whose size is about 21-27 centimeters high. Another formal difference between the text of the lid and the ones on the sides of the chamber can be recognized in the ductus. On the lid, the signs are often smaller than those one of the other two sides, and sometimes almost unintelligible. Generally, as already noted, it is possible to find traces of the written version of the text also in the carved parts. This mixed version of text, written and carved, can be an help for the reading of the most difficult passages. It should also be interesting to note that the carver never made corrections on the first redaction, as it is possible to check on the lid. The general layout of this side shows some particularities. At first, the four-register arrangement of the text is rare in the inner decoration of the coffins. Indeed, the lid has generally got a layout with one or two registers. Furthermore, in the burial chamber of baby, we find an articulated disposition of vertical columns with some tabulations and one list. This arrangement has got contact with the older scribal tradition of the text inside the coffin. According to this layout, the spells are in vertical columns with horizontal titles. This tradition is very near to the one of the few magical and religious papyri dated to the beginning of the Middle Kingdom or earlier, as the Gardiner papyri already mentioned, and to the administrative documentation dated to the late Old Kingdom. The content of the inscriptions is still awaiting for a complete study. The difficulty due to the rough carving of the signs and the poor condition of the surface make the reading difficult. Nevertheless, I would like to propose some suggestions concerning the interpretation of the funerary text and some other aspect of their redaction. At first, it is necessary to note the presence of spells comprised in the published corpus of the coffin text. In the edition of the Middle Kingdom corpus, we find a small group of texts from the chamber of baby. The edition, according to the sequence on the lid of chamber, lists the spell 914, 641, 179, 364, and 312. All out of the edition are the spells 473, 390, and 310. These spells are listed in the index of Leonard Lesko, together with the correct version of chapter 46 from the Book of Dead. These unpublished spells are sporadically mentioned on the other studies. For example, the version of spell 310 is used by Adolf Gutbub in the study about the turtles in the Greek-Roman religious text. Most of the inscriptions seems to be a new creation, or maybe better, an original collection from several traditions. When we look at the document as a chamber of baby, it is reasonable to suppose we've got to do with something of new or partially coherent with the bigger traditions, flourished just after the end of the Old Kingdom. In the report of the excavations, Griffith tried to attempt an interpretation of the text, giving some identification with specific chapters of the Book of Dead. What the scholar noted is the abnormal redaction of these chapters that diverge with the more common versions. This redactional aspect of the monument can represent the local interpretation of a wider cultural phenomenon, identified as textualization. In the monument of baby, the textualization is represented by the use of some titles very similar to the ones known in the wider funerary tradition, were preceded by the coffin text and later by the Book of Dead. In these cases, the titles can mark not only the content of the spell, but also, and above all, the scribal work of textualization that try to organize the materia sacra by means of metatextual classifiers, such as the titles are. The two surviving sites and the burial chamber with their two registers comprised a collection of unknown text. Despite their regular ductus, their content is obscure, with references, for example, to the co-goddess Mecheturet or to the god Nefertiti. Also, the most of the lead materials seems to have been original elaborations from different traditions, according to the textualization already mentioned, and testified by titles and metatextual information. Among the materials from the lead of a burial chamber, I would like to focus some specific compositions that should represent a good example for the Dendera first intermediate period tradition. The first text consists in a tableau with two rows of short text in the upper right corner. This obscure text has been the object of interpretation since the publication of the report. Griffith identifies it as a list linked to the cult of Hathor, an interpretation later taken up by Lacan in the Cairo catalogue. However, Fisher noted that the list, although fragmentary, does not mention the name of the goddess or her main cultic places. The interpretation of the text is also made difficult by its poor condition. To this, we must also add the difficulty, which cannot be overcome at the moment, of establishing the relationship between the upper and the lower register of a list. Another interesting formula of the lead is the so-called Book of 16 Ways. The structure of the text is clear enough, with a series of definitions described in these afterlife roads. At the very beginning of the book, after an empty space, we've got an introductory statement which poses some interpretative problems. As it appears on the document, sorry, you see here. Yeah. You see here. The text is to be read Reich Kaek, you shall know, a reuse of Sejam Kaef at the beginning of the statement, with a second person subject. The most common form in this case of statement is read at the first person stative Rech Kui, introduced by the expression of the pronominal subject iui. Despite this difference with the most common construction, the structure of the text follows a regular model in which the street number, its name, and its divine referent are presented in sequence as part of a specific knowledge. This schema may suggest that the text is a short version from a longer cosmographical text. The content of the composition remains obscure, and the same roads do not seem to have clear parallels with other cosmographic traditions. Another feature of the text seems to be the protective intent, confirmed by the final sequence, where birds of prey are mentioned. These birds introduce the theme developed by the following text concerning the nets that threaten the road to the afterlife. An interesting example of a re-elaboration of the tradition also known in other places is the drafting of the spell 310 of the coffin text. You see here. Despite the difference compared with the version known in Thebes, the content of the text respects the fundamental elements, focuses on the rebirth and the development of the dead. They are therefore particularly effective in references to the figure of Khepri and to the Tartar, whose appearance is associated with the regenerative process of plants. Finally, I would like to point out a short text, the nature of which seems to be didactic. You see here. The theme addressed by the text consists of the four pillars of the sky. This is a well-known subject in the coffin text, but Baby's version offers for the first time a precise topographical location of this element of cosmos. A first observation has to be done on the structure of the introduction, where we read Sek Hui Rech Kui Sechnet Fedu. Here I note the 4 pillars. We are dealing with a grammatical structure that could be in connection with the previous text, with which our composition creates a longer sequence. This connection is confirmed by the horizontal title above, where 2 different topics are presented, the Hebat boat and the 4 pillars of the sky. The 4 pillars are connected with the 4 cardinal points and to 4 different cities, Hermopolis in the south, Pe and Dep in the north, Heliopolis in the west, and Yan in the east. The topography of the text is certainly unbalanced towards Lower and Middle Egypt, since the most southern pillar is located in Hermopolis. This organization of sacred topography seems to depend on the tradition of Lower Egypt, a phenomenon also known from other sources in the Middle Kingdom and later. The content of the short text is important because it outlines a cosmic representation coherent with the meaning of the chamberlaid, supported like the sky by the 4 pillars. The data here exposed can testify to a rich textual tradition. The poor condition of the monument of Baby does not prevent us from evaluating the richness of its collection of funerary literature. What we would like to note at the very end of this paper is the composite nature of the text, as far as it can be reconstructed in a preliminary phases of research. An interesting mix of true funerary composition and cosmographical descriptions that testify to the redaction work done by the local workshop thanks to the presence of a rich library. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. Are there any questions from the audience here? Yeah, André? You want to have the question?
Just a little question is, do you think that this Dendera unicum is something that you have to think that's something that you can find just in Dendera, or just a product that maybe we could one day find in other towns? I mean, temples were at the epoch where places where ritual texts were created, because I think also in other texts of the Middle Kingdom we find more local elements. And so can you just a question about local workshop, but also local temples, like places of creation, of culture.
I think that the local models for the text of Baby can depend only on the redactional work. I mean that I'm not sure that every single spell we have in the burial chamber could be directly connected with a local tradition. I mean, not only, of course, if we could have some elements connected with the local cult or the local tradition, local libraries or other similar contexts, yeah, it's possible. But I don't think it's possible to connect directly this the whole collection of Baby to the local tradition. Maybe better to think about a local workshop for the collection, in my opinion. But of course, I cannot give you now an actual answer, and above all, a proof for this, a direct proof for this. I think there is a question. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a hand.
Professor Morens.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting a monument which is of great interest. I have a very specific question. You sometimes mentioned meta-textual comments, paratexts, and so on. And titles are very interesting indeed when they come from the manuscript tradition into this kind of monumentalized writing. Can you give us some idea about the distribution of titles? Because if I remember correctly, not every kind of spell does have a title, while others do have. Can you detect a distribution on that?
You are really right for the connection of the so-called titles and the content of the spell. I mean that usually we have horizontal titles above the position of the text, but it's a mistake to identify any horizontal elements we have on the lid as a title, because we have in some part of text an organization with tabulation, or I mean a more complex system in the layout of text. And in this case, I think that position of text, the position of the text doesn't respect the nature as title, but rather maybe a kind of a reorganization of a material of materials arranged in a different way on the original. So we have also to think about the organization of text on the coffin of burial chamber as a kind of attempt made by the scribe or or the carver to organize a material in a single solution, in a unique solution. It means with titles and probably something that could respect the original disposition of the text, maybe different from the final product we have on the lid of the coffin.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your observation.
Yes, we have one question.
Yeah, I think there are something on the
documentation. Yeah, about the publication. If you could.
Inshallah, for the first inshallah, I would like to, but yeah, I would like, but when it's very difficult to explain. Yeah, I think that as I said, the publication of Petrie still remain fundamental in our approach, but it's necessary to have a complete photographic documentation in order to check the written and carved versions of the text, and also to check the difference, because I made a collection of the work of Petrie. I have to confirm that the copies of Petrie are perfect. Just a few signs can be corrected, and you can have some added, but very, very few signs.
Okay, thank you. I think, given that we're running over time a little bit, we will proceed to the next speaker, Ramadan Hussein, who's joining us from the University Tübingen. And he will speak about the texts on the coffin of Pepi Ima from Naga Eder. Please, Ramadan.
Hello, everyone. Let me first share my screen because I would forget during the course. But yes, thank you, Ilona, for giving me the floor. And of course, thank you for Andrea, who just invited me and made me go back to Pepi Ima. And I forgot all about this coffin for so many years now. When I went to Brown University, I knew exactly my information gaps as a student, and there were so many of them. And one of them was the first intermediate period, and my knowledge of it was completely fuzzy. And of course, I've took the opportunity and the advantage that Ed Bovarsky was one of my professors at Brown. So I asked him if he could teach me one-on-one course on the first intermediate period, and ended up we were together, I think, for 2 or 3 courses on the first intermediate period. And by the end of it, he asked me if I would like to write something about the coffin of Pepi Ima. the text, and he gave me a photograph of some photos of the text of Pepi Imam. And I started working on it. And of course, for all of us who attended Ed Bravarsky's lecture yesterday, this was an absolute scholarly treat for all of us to learn something about his knowledge of the first intermediate period. But the coffin of Pepi Imam is interesting, as you could see, is one of those painted polychrome coffin. And from this period, let me try to, yes. The interesting part about Reisner's excavations is that we don't know much about the archaeological context of the coffin of Pepi Imam, and also the other coffins that Ed mentioned yesterday in the material. But we know that by the end of the year 1900, Kubel had the news that some illicit excavations were conducted for the benefit of one of the rich men in the town of Gerga. And Kubel had contacted Reisner, who was working at the time in Deir el-Balas. By 1901, Reisner started to put together a campaign for Naged Deir, and he worked 3 major campaigns in there from 1901 to 1905, and that was funded by Mrs. Phoebe Hearst. And then from 1910 to 1912, and it was funded by the MFA and Harvard. And the third campaign was 1923 to 1924. So from my conversations with the folks in the MFA, that the coffin possibly went to the MFA after the 1924, something around 1930s. And if Peter Manuelian in the room with us, he can correct me on all of this information. But as you can see, this is just an image from one of the books that dealt with Naged Deir material that shows the many terraces that Reisner had to excavate. And we're not sure where exactly the coffin, the tomb where the coffin of Pepi Imam came from is located in those terraces. But of course, we've followed Ed Bravarsky's talk about the inscribed material from Naged Deir, including the painted tombs and also the stelae, the seriation of all these stelae from the red group, the green group, the polychrome group, and the blue group. Those are chronological markers, of course. But also we've heard from Ed Bravarsky about possible tens of coffins that came out of Naged Deir, maybe 50, 51, we're not sure. It seems like this was uncharacteristic of George Reisner, really, to keep record and inventory of everything he discovered, but there is something that is missing about the archaeological record and notes from Naged Deir. But some of these coffins, as you could see, some of them, and those photographs I owe Ed Bravarsky. He gave them when I was at Brown. He gave them to me when I was at Brown. And some of these wooden coffins are just those painted, no text on them. Others, fragments like this one that came from tomb N361, it bears text. So definitely there was a text tradition in Naged Deir, because Naged Deir is very famous for the stelae tradition and also not much about the painted tombs. But there is one thing that is missing about this very important intellectual atmosphere at Naged Deir during the first intermediate period, which is text production. Literary text, the religious texts in particular, but definitely we have some witnesses that says there must have been some religious text tradition going on in Naged Deir. And this is one of the fragments of these coffins. And this is the coffin of Pepi Imam. Pepi Imam was a mayor and also a rihab, a lector priest, which would make us think about how Pepi Imam, as one of the very few witnesses of text sources from Naged Deir, was put together, because possibly the owner was a rehab, he's a lector priest, he's a ritualist of some sort. So this is one of the photographs, and also I owe it to Ebruvarsky, from Reisner's records that shows Pepe Imah's coffin in situ when it was discovered. The lid off, and the lid here has this star decoration that could be interpreted somehow as a star clock or some just decorative motifs. But this is the situation of the coffin when it was found. We don't have really much in terms of information about the archaeological record of the coffin of Pepi Imah. But from the annotated sketches and illustrations of Reisner's notebooks about Nagader, we could put together some description of the archaeological context when the coffin was discovered. And I put it in this description. Very little is known from Reisner's field notes about the archaeological context of Pepi Imah's coffin. Basically, in 403, that's the tomb of Pepi Imah, is a rock-cut tomb consisting of a large room with an irregular form. Its walls, however, were well cut into the rocks of the Jebel. A pit leading to the chamber where the coffin was found was roughly cut into the floor. The mummy was equipped with a small wooden box and a long spear. A small wooden beard painted green and found near the mummy's head indicates that the mummy once had a funeral wooden mask. The archaeological context of N4003 seemingly underwent some alterations in later periods, as Reisner found an intrusive chamber containing fragments of a coffin and two small jars on top of N403. Apparently, the tomb was reused by the Copts, as there were traces of smoke on the rocks and remains of burnt bricks as well. This is pretty much all I can personally reconstruct from the archaeological record of the coffin of Pepi Imah based on Reisner's drawings and field notes. But the coffin itself is, as you can see, this is one of the, this is the front wall side of the coffin. And for some reason, the coffin, even though it has text on it, it did not make it to the box edition, like many other coffins really didn't. It wasn't included in his coffin text, parallel text editions. But also Leonard Lesko, in his index of the coffin, the text on the Middle Kingdom coffins, he did not include it in his index as well. Harco Willems, of course, included it in his analysis of the standard coffins and the typology of the decorations and the text on it. Antonio Morales, in his very interesting dissertation on the pyramid text during the Middle Kingdom, he included it in the corpus of his study. But the text remained really unstudied since the time I wrote my MA thesis on it. And after that, I wrote 2 articles about the coffin, not exactly the coffin, but about certain spells on the coffin that were unparalleled. And one of them came out in Festref Leonard Lesko, and the other came out in Festref Ed Borowarsky. So it remained really not studied very well. And that's why I'm very grateful to the opportunity I come back and look at it. If we want to just put together a description as to the content and the genre of text and the distribution of the text on the sides of the coffin, we start with the front side, and we see here the panels, the main panels that has text written in them are 3 panels, even this one in the tabular form, so that makes it 3 panels. The first one is, of course, written in hieroglyphs, and it is a sequence that includes the text PT 32, 25, 32 again, and 36 and 34. Those are pretty much libation, censing, libation, purification, mouth washing with matron text. Then comes the long offering list, which is about food production. It could be ritualized list, really. And then comes the third panel with the boot spill, that is about food provision, fighting hunger, fighting eating extreme, and also drinking urine. So for those of you who are more interested in coffin text material, we know very well that boot spill first time appeared in the pyramid of King Unas. Pretty much first occurrence was on the Western Jebel, put together on the same wall with the serpent spill. And then you see it again on the eastern wall of the burial chamber of King Unas, right next to offering spills as well. So the grouping of the boot spills together with offerings text, you see it continuing here on the coffin of Pepe Imas, who he's pretty much following the same tradition of this text coalescence and text grouping. So, but even the boot spells, when they go into the Middle Kingdom, they're not just two spells. The genre increases exponentially to the point that we have about 60 or even over 60 different spells of boot spells, which means this particular genre of fighting hunger and fighting eating excrement and drinking urine, it became very central to the composition of religious text in the Middle Kingdom. But interestingly, this 60 plus text diminish again in the New Kingdom and becomes only one chapter, that's Book of the Dead 92. It's very interesting to see the trajectory of up and down of a certain text genre in Egyptian history, and boot spill is a very good example. Then the backside of the coffin of Pepe Imam starts also with those about 1, 2, 3, 4 text panels. And the first one of them, of course, it goes back with another version of a boot spill that is about food production, and the text is written in retrograde form. Then the middle of this particular panel here has two text directions, one in retrograde and the other one in a normal reading direction of the hieroglyphs. And this was baffling me in the time I was looking at this text. But the content and the genre of these particular texts, one of them, this one here, is unparalleled text. You could call it new compilation at the time. So even though I didn't find any parallel to the exact wording, even though it's dealing with the same genre that is boot spill about food provision and fighting hunger, not eating feces, not drinking urine. But the wording of this particular segment is not paralleled anywhere else. So, and what it shows also, it shows the importance of a localized text and how a text that just been incepted in a certain region would reflect some of the culture characteristic of that particular region. And here you could see it in the source and the kind of food that Pepe Ima would wish for, because boot spill is about you don't want to eat something, but you wish for certain food. And here, one of the things that, one of the items of food that Pepe Ima wishes is 2 of the red bulls, the red oxen. And those red oxen, possibly the ones that have been bred in the temple of Anubis, the local temple. And that is something very interesting, gives some ideas about how you localize a text. The other interesting feature, local feature in this particular text, is one of the deities that the deceased trying to connect himself to is possibly a deified object, cult object, that is the Sechem scepter. And the Sechem scepter is one of those fetishes, possibly from the Thanite Nome. And of course, it says something about how you bring a local god into the new text that you're putting together. And then comes more of this unparalleled text here. The wording might seem familiar, and you see it in other texts, but it's still the entire composition. You don't see any exact match for it. But the genre is about lamentation in the embalming house, possibly, because lamentation over the coffin. And it's been done by the two mourners, that is Isis and Nephthys. And it's very important to keep this in mind. And then part of the text, this text as well, is about cosmic disturbance and resurrection. The cosmic disturbance that is alluded to in this text is that the fight between Apophis and Re, and this time not Apophis really, it is a serpent. And the allusion to that particular incident is about the deceased having a knife and a finger over the vertebra of a serpent. So pretty much early on, you're talking about allusion to that particular mythological episode about the fight between Re and the cosmic serpent Apophis. And then comes that panel here that is coffin text, exact match of coffin text 569. And it's about vindication of the deceased over his enemy and protection of the deceased. Then comes the two ends, the head end and the foot end of the coffin of Pepi Imam. They're painted with, of course, the head end with the false door decoration, or the palace facade, and then comes the granaries on the foot end. But the very interesting thing is that the edge inscription here. The four sides of the coffin of Pepi Imam have edge inscription, which means, which puts Pepi Imam among possibly 60 to 62 coffins that have been inscribed on the edges, have inscriptions on the edges. And this, yeah. It's those coffins, interestingly, the text on the edges of these 60 plus coffins were recorded by Leonard Lesko in his index of the spells on the Egyptian Middle Kingdom coffins and related documents. And they were carefully studied in a very, very nice article by Silke Geralet, that is die Fügenschriften auf Särgen des Mittleren Reiches, and that was in the Zeek. I can't see the number, in the Zeek 23. And Silke had an interestingly categorized the genres of the text that comes on the edges of these 60 plus coffins. And she had the main genre listed up and have this interesting typology. From the first one is assisting from Gib protection, eliminating the face and opening eyes. Those are very interesting. Assistance from Nut, the deceased mother, protection and unwrapping the mummy bandages. Physical integrity and connection to Anubis in the embalming workshop. Assistance from Nut, protection of the deceased heads and body reconstruction. Protection, physical integrity and bodily reconstruction. Raising the deceased, fighting bodily awareness. Assistance from Nut in assuming a place among the imperishable stars. Assistance from Nut, protection and bodily reconstruction. Assistance from Nephthys, bodily reconstruction, reassembling bones and return of the reju fluids to his body. And assistance from Horus, bodily reconstruction, reassembling bones and positioning the deceased arms. Assistance from Ptah, protection of the tomb. Those are the main genre that Zelka has noticed on the for the text on the edges of 60 plus coffins. But very interestingly, they're not really matching what Pepe Imam have written on the edges of his coffin. He uses a different text to convey different meanings, not really agreeing or following this particular tradition. So there is a separation here. Stylistically speaking, the edge inscriptions on the coffin of Pepe Imam, they alternate between black and red. So there is an excessive use of the red color in the writing of a whole column like this one here. And it shows that he's not, the scribe is not really following a tradition, or maybe not aware of writing, of using red ink for titles, as is being customarily in the standard coffins from the Middle Kingdom, which makes Georges Poisonner's observation about the use of red ink in writing titles. He thinks it's practical and functional rather than symbolic, because in the later period, you would see those malevolent beings, their names are written in red, but he would argue that the red color had a function, and it's practical, not symbolic, when they write the titles of the texts on the standard coffins from the Middle Kingdom. Pepe Imam has used red ink extensively. A whole column would be written entirely in red, and that doesn't mean it's a title. But on the front edge, on the front side, on the edge of the front side, the text starts, it's in column 50, it's in black, but it's has a match, a textual match, that is coffin text 499, which later on became Book of the Dead 92. And this is pretty much the only chapter of the boot spells. And also in the same column, column 50, has a mix and match of 499 and coffin text 500, with no separation as we used to see in the coffin text, on the coffins of on the standard coffins. The themes of those two texts together, 499 and 500, are pretty much focusing, opening a path for the Ba of the deceased, releasing the Ba of the deceased, unhindered nocturnal journey for the deceased, reception by Ray. So the deceased will be received by Ray, receiving assistance from the Eye of Horus, no restraint of the soul, of the Ba soul. So those are pretty much the main focus of book of this particular merged, conflated text, 490 and 500. Then column 51 is written in red, and it is coffin text 488 and 492. The themes of these two texts together are about opening the doors of heaven for the Ba soul, and the Akh, the shadow of the deceased, free movement, unhindered nocturnal journey, reception by Ray in the midst of his shrine, no restraints of the Ba soul. Then the foot end, the text on the edge of the foot end of the coffin of Pepe Imam, it's pretty much 498, and it's praising Ray in his sailing to the floodplain to the south of the horizon, and then the deceased Ba soul and the Akh in shadow joining the bark of Ray. Those themes are very important, because I will be talking about them when we try to teleologically think about the meaning of the text of Pepe Imam. Then on the back side of the coffin, the edge has also the same thing. One column in black and the other one in red, alternating red and black, and the composition of this edge is unparalleled. And this is the one I published for Festschrift Leonard Lesko. And the themes of it's about protection, maintaining physical integrity of the deceased, deterring the evil eye. And when I was working on this article, I tried very hard to see if the concept of fighting the evil eye has really been treated by any of the other coffin text witnesses. I failed to find some of the coffins that would deal with the coffin, with the evil eye, except for Pepe Imam is pretty much, he's talking about fighting evil eye. And the evil eye that would inflict physical damage on the person, not the evil eye that would be in challenge with Ray, an evil eye here being Apophis. And the other concept, the other theme in this particular text is raising and offering Ma'at to Ray, and overpowering netherworld demons arriving at celestial agriculture fields. Those are pretty much some of the basic themes that you find in this unparalleled composition on the coffin of Pepe Imam. Then on the edge, the head end, the edge there had coffin text 496, sorry, and this is later on becomes Book of the Dead 91. And the themes about it is opening the face of the deceased, and this is very interesting because even here he says opening the face of the nature. So I think this is something about the nature, he being the deceased, the natured deceased that has been initiated into the category of nature. Then the other theme of that particular text here is not restraining the basal. So if I think about how the coffin, the text of the coffin of Pepe Imam came together, and this process of putting everything together, the coalescing, it made me for some years now think about the composition process on medium, like the coffin of Pepe Imam, for example, and the nature of the composition process in ancient Egypt, trying to understand it. So one of the things that I was looking into for a couple of years now is that intertextuality and how it originated from the ideas of Mikhail Bakhtin and his ideas about dialogism. And then when he came up with his ideas, then Julia Kristeva had developed the theory of intertextuality. These, in the words of some of Mikhail Bakhtin's ideas, is that, and I paraphrase what he says, a textual work does not simply exist, but is generated in relation to another textual work. And as such, a text is an intersection of multiple textual surfaces. If we try to apply this on our spills, what we call it spills, we think this is a composition like Pepe Imam is an intersection of many spills together. But when Julia Kristeva started to develop pretty much theories about intertextuality, one of the things that she was saying about text composition in general, she says, any text is constructed as a mosaic of quotations. Any text is the absorption and transformation of another. So it says pretty much every text should be based on something before it or contemporaneous to it. And of course, Egyptology is never really far away from theory, even literary theory. And Antonio Libriano started to pick on the ideas of intertextuality and explain it from Egyptological point of view. And in his words, intertextuality, a concept that implies that a text is never a truly original creation of its author, but a part of a dynamic universe of texts with which it dialectically interrelates. Same line of thinking about every text is relying on other texts, and we should be recognizing this. And of course, in anthropology, in textual anthropology in general and folklore, we see Richard Bauman, one of his explanation of intertextuality as a philological perspective conceives of text essentially as cultural object. Relations of descent and similarities. I think you lost me for a second here, so I'm gonna say this again. So in the words of Richard Bauman, his explanation of intertextuality, saying intertextuality as philological perspective conceives of text essentially as culture object, durable, repeatable, classifiable, and linked to other texts by relations of descent and generic similarities. In fact, when I read those particular parts, durable, repeatable, classifiable, and linked to other texts by relations of descent, this is pretty much tells me those are the spills that we are dealing with. Either permatext spills, coffin text spills, Book of the Dead chapters, all these terminology that is our own terminology, but for the Egyptians, they were not permatext and not coffin text and not Book of the Dead. There's something else, Meru. So, but this explains the life of a certain spill. It is durable, it is repeatable, it is classifiable, it can be linked to other texts by relations of descent and generic similarities. This is pretty much what we deal with. So within this framework of intertextuality, and we needed to explain ancient literatures, the characteristics of ancient literature in general, which will help us to understand the process of composition of texts, like the text on Pepi Ima, for example. Ancient literatures are corporate literatures. You don't see something about the authorship. We don't know who really authored these texts. So it's corporate, it belongs to everyone. Often evolved over centuries, and this is also the case of Egyptian texts. Compositions consist mostly of shared textual materials. One of these big things that we always think about in Egypt is that the matching of texts, the parallels means those texts are really shared with so many text person who put them on different media of transcription. Texts were merged. This is what we see also. Various traditions were integrated, alluded to, and adopted. And this is, I personally see all those elements fit and describe Egyptian religious text in a very good way. So some forms of intertextuality would be explicit and implicit in the form of commentary on and translation of older texts, and that we don't get much from ancient Egypt in the form of commentary translation on older texts, but we see this extensive verbal overlaps among all the text witnesses that we are dealing with in the form of retelling, rewriting, reworking, and continuation of earlier texts. Borrowing of text segments, what we call it spells, in the form of quotation, allusions, and expressive reuse of the language of another text. Those you could see also. I would see there is so many commonality between Pepi Ima and later coffins. And then following a literary model that is the development of text genre or composition based on a literary model, role model that is before it. In fact, I was thinking about this process for so long, trying to understand it along the line of intertextuality and how things come together. And then I put together a hypothetical model that I published also in an article for Festschrift Carl Michel Yates. And I thought about a hypothetical composition process in which there would be a hypothetical textual heritage, a reservoir of textual heritage, since we don't have authorship. In this reservoir, hypothetical reservoir, this be the oral tradition or scriptorium, it could be whatever, but it is a reservoir for the entire community or the entire culture that contain that text. And from this reservoir, text persons would draw out base texts, base texts that they will use to compose texts on coffins or on the walls of tombs or whatever. And then this borrowed base text or drawn base text would settle in textual tradition. And these textual tradition would have to formulate its own characteristics, its own traits, regional traditions. And that would be, of course, depending on the knowledge of the scriptures community, all those text community individuals, their knowledge of the text or lack of, then the mechanics of text transmission, the scribal convention they follow, they form their own tradition as a group, and then, which could be a workshop. But as a result, the tradition produces unique compositions, even within the same cemetery. You can't find two coffins that a replica of one another, even though they are from the same cemetery, which says something about if you are a text person, a text editor, which is the process of composition is mostly editorial because you bring together different spills. If you are a text person who is editing a text on a coffin, you have some freedom to show originality, and the originality in the form how you make your coffin, for example, unique and different from the coffin in the next door tomb, for example. And this originality would at some point result in new material, new text material, new compilation. And this new compilation would definitely feed into the reservoir, the textual reservoir. So this bidirectional flow of text from the reservoir into the reservoir, something that would also explain why do we have new material compiled. But if you put this and try to explain the composition of Pepi-Imam along the line of this intertextuality, you would see that Pepi-Imam on the front side, he used a base text that is text that has been established, canonized, and you see it for so long. It's a permanent text sequence P232, PT32, 25, 32, 36, 34. Very well established, and that becomes the base text for the front side. Then a long offering text, also a base text, and then a conflated boot spill. A boot spill that is pretty much different segments of other spills put together to form a new composition of boot spill that is not matched word for word, for example. And then on the back side of the coffin, his base text was a matched and parallel boot spill, followed by an unparalleled compilation of text, and then another matched boot spill or paralleled boot spill. Then on the edge of the front side, there he had this interesting base text that is 499, which later became Book of the Dead 92. And if you see it, it's following the same genre, that is opening a burial chamber and releasing the soul, opening a path, free movement, unhindered nocturnal journey, reception by ray, receiving assistance from the eye force, no restraint of this soul, the same exact content of the earlier boot spill, the base text. And then comes on the edge of the front side, you have unparalleled compilation. Then on the edge of the backside, you have a base text that's boot spill, coffin text 499, then followed by a variant of a base text, a boot spill 500 here. And then in the foot end, you have the base text, coffin text 498. Then on the head end, you have the base text, coffin text 496. But this is my remarks on the composition of the coffin of Pepi Imam. But teleologically, what is the entire composition really means? I've been also thinking about would every composition on mediums, on coffins, on tombs, for example, would be somehow an abridged form of a si'ahu text. The idea of si'ahu text, and it's been, of course, put forward by Jan Assmann, and so many had followed pursuit, and even before Jan Assmann, Albertina Shudlevitsky had published the papyrus Sukovitsky, and she put together some themes of glorification or the si'ahu on this papyrus, and mostly about the arrival of the deceased son, Horus, into his presence, veneration by the son, this Horus, and recitation of praise, performing funerary cults, pouring libation, presentation of daily offerings, driving all enemies away, justification of the deceased over enemies, protection against malevolent entities, and of course, Mark Smith picking up on the idea of the Sikha'u, suggesting that the original Si'ahu rituals might have been the temple of Osiris, then has been later recited for the deceased and moved to the tomb. Harco Willems, in his article about the social and ritual context of a mortuary liturgy of the Middle Kingdom, also touching on Si'ahu as an important ritual, funeral ritual for the deceased. And Borkerbach is in his publication of Papyrusschmidt, put together an interesting explanation about Sikha'u text, mostly Permit text spills that survived into the early Ptolemaic period. And then you would see that there is a connection between the Si'ahu rituals and the Stundenwachen ritual. But to think about this and try to put an abridged list of themes in text that would be considered a Si'ahu text, we see that those rising assistance and protection through various gods, funerary offerings, incense burning provision, food, reconstitution of the body, protection, ascension to the sky, offerings, vindication, rising, exaltation, lamentation in the embalming workshops, mourning rituals, initiation, free movement, going forth by day, assuming a bird form, being in the company of the sun god, assistance from Horus and several deities in different places, protection from Isis and Nephthys as mourners, physical integrity, reception of insignia of authority, free movement, unhindered nocturnal journey from the underworld toward the horizon, being in the company of the sun god, unity of Osiris and Re, arrival at the horizon, unification with the Ka and Ba, reception by the gods, free movement of offering the Ma'it to Re, transportation to the fields of offerings. If this selected themes of a ritual, a Si'ahu text, can we match any of them in the genre of Pepi Imam? We see them easily existing in the generic composition of Pepi Imam. We see libation, sensing libation, purification, mouth washing. We see food provision. We see fighting hunger, eating excrement, drinking urine. You fight those. We see boot spills. We see more of these boot spills about food provision. We see lamentation in the embalming house, cosmic disturbance and resurrection. We see vindication of the deceased over his enemy, protection, opening a path, releasing the ba soul, unhindered nocturnal journey, reception by Re, receiving assistance from the IFAOs, no restraints, opening the doors of heaven for the soul, for the and the shadow of the deceased, free movement, and then reception by Re in the midst, no restraint of the soul, praising Re, the deceased, Ba and Ach and shadow joining the bark of Re, protection and maintaining physical integrity of Pepi Ima, deterring the evil eye, raising and offering Ma'at by Pepi Ima, overpowering netherworld demons, arriving at celestial agriculture fields, opening the face of the deceased, not restraining the Ba of Pepi Ima. Those are all themes that present in the text composition of Pepi Ima that is matching everything that you would need for the Siahu ritual. And I would think that the composition of Pepi Ima is more of an abridged form of a Siahu book that is given to Pepi Ima. And, excuse me, and in this case, we would see, even though Pepi Ima is the only text witness that we have from Nagadir, even though the couple fragments that we see, we can't really rely on them to draw together the characteristics of a Nagadir text tradition. So this makes Pepi Ima's coffin as a very, very important text source from an area that might have had a very good text tradition, and we have, I don't want to say lost, but somehow it's gotten forgotten because we don't have the text witnesses anymore. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramadan. This was really a very stimulating talk. Are there any questions from the audience?
I see Harko raising hands.
Yeah, Harko,
yeah.
You want to?
Hi, Ramadan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay. What a fantastic talk.
Thank you.
I knew about this coffin, of course, but you've really gotten so much information out of it. Really splendid work.
Thank you.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I could talk for hours about what you've been discussing, but I would like to highlight perhaps two things. One is just about a question that you raised about coffin texts about the evil eye. There is a very interesting article by Borghout's published in Journal of Egyptian Archaeology 59, The Evil Eye of Apophis. This deals at long length about with the evil eye and includes a lot of discussion of coffin text passages. So that is something, but you're nodding, so you know that apparently. Yeah. Another point is well, you're absolutely right about the aspect of intertextuality that you're raising. I do wonder, however, if you could say that this is a matter of a compilation of sa'ahus. I wouldn't be astonished if it is, but what you were discussing is themes that are raised in the sa'ahu texts, but it's also a matter of the way of formulating. Sa'ahu texts have a certain format. Before you can say that these are sa'ahu texts, I think you should not look at, only at the content, but also at the form of the texts. I'm not sure, but I never really read all those texts, whether they would be sa'ahu. But I think there is a very interesting passage that you mentioned where you can see where they may have been quarrying to find their texts. It's on the head end where you have coffin text spell 496, which is titled When Her and Netja, opening
open the face of them
to the god. You mentioned that, and I may have misunderstood you, but I thought you were saying that Pepi Ima is here posing as a god, to an extent he may be, but wouldn't it be more likely that what we actually have here is an original temple text in which you have such a text of the daily temple ritual, which concerns the topic of opening the face. This is what's done in the morning at the naos. You're opening the naos for the divine statue and recite this particular text, which is then transferred onto a coffin for use by a dead person.
Yeah, if I may respond to the when her netter, I am also one of the things that I'm looking into. I'm writing a manuscript on the text of Padinisit from Dynasty 26. And one of the things that I try to discuss is who would be a netter, and the concept of netter. Is netter really means a god in our modern term of the word god? So, or netter is a category that an individual can be initiated into the netterhood. And there's so many ways of it. In fact, one of it is a very obvious one, is the Nut spells in the Pyramid text. When Nut spreads her, even the text says, spreads her body over you and her name of this and this, and then comes that when in ek im netcher nen gefut ef, so that you become in nature and there is no enemy for you. So one of the ways of making a deceased in nature is the relationship between with his mother Mut, and also sometimes relationship with Isis as well, that would nature a disease. So I think at this point, you definitely might be very correct, as would be a daily temple ritual that you go and open your face, the face of the nature that's being the god. But in this funeral rituals, when it is concerning individuals, I would think it's either the text has been giving a different layer of meaning that is dealing with individuals.
That's what I was suggesting.
Yeah. The text itself is been taking, and the concept, the category of nature has been available to individual through initiation. So I think embalming itself, I think mummification is an initiation process, not just body preservation. That the final product after the set of rituals is you producing a nature in the form of a mummy. So I definitely agree with you that maybe the early use of this text will be inside the temple. Then the naturehood becomes a category that individual can be initiated into.
And here, of course, it's interesting that the tomb owner is a priest.
He's a lector priest, yeah.
Okay, I won't monopolize the discussion. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Yes, are there any other questions from the chat, perhaps? Do I have anyone? No? Could I ask you, Ramadan, maybe you mentioned it, but do you have an idea about the date of the coffin? Maybe you mentioned it, but it escaped me.
I didn't mention it. This is why I'm here. As I said, Ed, when he offered me this coffin to work on, he was very convinced that this coffin belonged to the third generation of Dynasty 9. And based, of course, on iconographical analysis, his fantastic one. And of course, the text also, the color scheme of the coffin itself fits very well into the polychrome group stelae, which is also toward the third generation of Dynasty 9. When I wrote this article for Professor Lesko, I tried to find more, to look at the paleography inside the text, not on the iconography, not in the iconography. And I found out that some of the paleographical features and signs would put this coffin toward the end of Dynasty 9 and the Dynasty 11, specifically in the time period between the end of Dynasty 9 and the time of the production of the coffins of Kawit and Ashait. Because after that, I don't see any paleographical similarities between the coffin of Pepi Imal and any other coffin after Kawit or Ashait. And I would refer you to my article for Festschrift Lesko to see this discussion. And the other thing I've also noticed is that, and this is why Ed gave me the coffin, is to try to find also linguistic grounds for this dating. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the use of the prospective Sejemef passive. And in the Old Kingdom, there is always Sejemem F for the prospective passive or Sejemu F. But in the classical period, that's the Middle Egyptian, these two forms cease to exist to express the prospective passive, and then it becomes a normal Sejemef. Pepi Ima has three forms. When he's talking prospective passive, he uses Sejemef, he uses Sejemuf, and then he uses Sejemef, which makes him either a person who is holding onto the older tradition from the Permit text, Sejemef, Sejemuf, and then a transition into the more streamlined Sejemef as a prospective passive. He has those three forms, which makes him somehow in a transition between the late Dynasty 9 and early Middle Kingdom.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question or an observation about the fact that so text, funerary texts are really not my research area, but I think that observation can go in your direction because the formula, for example, of the offering, the Mat Touré, there's something that seems unique for the period. And you know, yeah, how we see about religions, religious behavior, private, the link between the individuals and religion, it could be something strange that an individual at this epoch say, I am offering Mat Touré or to a god. But finally, this idea is something spread before the Middle Kingdom, before the maybe also before the first intermediate period, because we found the same formula in one architrave, in two monuments in Dendera, and also in one in Balat, in a stela, in the autobiography. So that's something nice to see that finally this idea that we find in your case in a funerary text, it is something we found also in other kind of monuments. And maybe because exactly we have this background of a sahu, this background of rituals that were developed, that were there, and from which scribes and etc. Taken to create also funerary texts. Then
I agree with you. Our knowledge of Egyptian thoughts usually we stem it from text sources or other documents like stelae or other things. But as long as we don't have these documents, so we have no knowledge of what practice went on at what certain period of time. But definitely when you see, for example, when I was trying to look at who raises the mat, and that very famous scene of the kings of the New Kingdom, for example, would raise the mat and offer it to the king. It seems like it has been a practice, either a temple practice or even, I don't know, but we always learned that, and we have learned that the only king is the one responsible for maintaining mat and offering to the gods. But when it comes to a text for a person, and as Harko has noticed, this guy was a priest, he's a lector priest. So for me, I would think he's Padi Amenopet of the first intermediate period. You know, Padi Amenopet in late period, he's a lector priest. He has every text you think of inside his tomb in Nassasif. But Pepi Ima, as a lector priest, maybe had this freedom to show this. And this is the importance of dealing with some text material that really does not conform to the standard, deviates a little bit, so you learn more from it.
Okay, Any more questions in the chat, Amr? No? No? Okay, then we can finish this wonderful session. I would like to thank the speakers again for contributing to this really inspiring afternoon. And we will take a short break, I think, until 6:30, or when we have the keynote speaker by Irene Vestermalle. Thank you again, and see you in a bit.